Pizza Jaffa's orange rose, microchips us, iPhone cameras us, taco salads us, Torta Lavabos us, Olive Garden us, White Foster us, Sabra Hamas, Hasbara sus.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Bad Hasbara, the world's most moral podcast, where I take a look at the magical world of political propaganda from all over the world, specifically Israel. What's up, everyone? My name is Matt Lieb. Hi, nice to see you here again. Thank you for listening to this podcast. I'm always stoked at how many people are actually listening to it. Given that this is a podcast that I started, just because I was mad one night and I was like, I gotta talk about my feelings. And, the fact that you guys are joining in me talking about my feelings makes me feel good. And I love it. So thank you, everyone out there who is listening to this podcast, just listening. The ones who are listening on Spotify or on Apple Podcast Store, thank you so much. You rule, and I love you. For those of you out there watching on YouTube, you rule, and I love you as well. However, this podcast is constantly demonetized, and so the only way that I can make money is usually it's like through the ads on the actual just the podcast part, the audio like Spotify and stuff. And if you're listening on YouTube, I can't make no money. So just a reminder, we have a Patreon. Patreon.com/badhasbara. Once again, that is, here it is in the ticker, patreon.com/badhasbara. Support us. Support me. Support, my future producer. Someday I'll have one. Support my sometimes co-host Daniel Mate, who is going to be back this week talking about stuff with me. Support, please, help, or whatever. Also, once again, Sacramento Punchline, March 17th. That's a Sunday, 7 p.m. Me, my wife, Francesca Fiorentini. We're going to be co-headlining. Get your tickets now, please. The link is in the freaking thing. So click that link and, come see us do comedy. It's a lot of fun. It'll be during St. Paddy's Day, so you can be drunk if you want. Either way. And finally, thank you to our mod at Reddit, JP Ben, who he's the moderator for reddit.com/r/badhasbara. So subscribe to the Reddit. Share with us some of your favorite Hasbaras. Those are fun. And thank you to Adam Levin, who is cutting up clips and helping me, produce the show a bit. Hopefully someday I'll make more money and then I can pay him to be like a producer. That would be sick. Okay, today we got quite an episode, heavy one, fellas. Now, all of the episodes thus far have been pretty heavy. I mean, there's a genocide going on, which is not always like the most ripe for comedy. Like, jokes are hard during sad times, but I also think are necessary. And this week is no different, because this week, as I'm sure all of you have heard or seen, Aaron Bushnell, who was an active duty airman in the U.S. Air Force, set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in D.C. and live streamed it. I'm not going to play the video, at least the burning part, because that is just, if you've watched it, you know how absolutely horrifying it is. But I will play his statements before he did the act, because I do think it is important for people to understand, and he wanted it to be shown. His reasoning was clear and sound. And if there's one thing you have to, say is he had some real moral clarity in what he was doing. And I have that for you.
Is Aaron Bushnell. I am an active duty member of the United States Air Force, and I will no longer be complicit in genocide. I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest But compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonizers, it's not extreme at all. This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal.
So he then immediately after that poured gasoline or some sort of accelerant on himself and lit himself on fire and screamed "Free Palestine" until, as one Twitter user said, his body physically couldn't produce words anymore. This was a gruesome act that I think, a lot of people, even people who weren't alive during Vietnam, it brought you back to the time when monks in Vietnam set themselves on fire to protest what was going on there. And it was really both disturbing and like wondrous to watch, because I'd never seen anything like it before. And it continued being one of those seminal moments, I think, in this in the past few months, because after, while he was burning to death, a U.S. Secret Service agent pulled out his gun, literally pulled out his gun and pointed it at him while others were screaming at him, "I don't need guns, I need a fire extinguisher." So this is a U.S. Secret Service man pointing a gun at a guy fully engulfed in flames while others are, putting him out with a fire extinguisher. And he is keeping that gun on him. He does not let up, as if this guy is going to pull out a gun. It's like one of the most insane things that I've ever seen, because it's just like, what do you think's going to happen, bro? How much of a pussy do you need to be to point a gun at a guy who's fully on fire? As if you're like, no, I've seen this before in one of my police training videos. It's the old "I'm on fire" routine. You put yourself on fire, but secretly you got a gun under there and you're going to shoot. I swear, the amount of the pussery in American law enforcement is unmatched. Maybe matched by Israeli security forces themselves. But the U.S. government agent not helping put out the fire should come as no surprise to anyone, as they reject all forms of ceasefire. But he said he was considering a humanitarian pause. See, that's a little joke. I have a little joke in there. I gotta write a joke or else I get so sad that I don't want to move. So yeah, this, I feel like, fully encapsulates the American foreign policy in the Middle East. Like, you see the suffering and death just outside of sovereign Israeli territory, and you decide, what'll help this? Guns. More guns. Let's bring in some guns. I'm sure this will solve any kind of horror that's currently happening in the world. This, by the way, was the second protester to self-immolate in a desperate attempt to protest our country's ongoing complicity in this Gaza genocide. In December, a woman protesting the war set herself on fire outside the Israeli consulate in Atlanta. And that's all we know about her. That's literally it. We know she was a woman who set herself on fire. We don't have a name. And if you read any of these news articles that came out the day that it happened, these like bafflingly incurious journalists who reported it, they just state that it was a woman set herself on fire, and that one of the cops trying to put her out was burned. And that's all we know. There's no follow-up. There's no nothing. I don't know if she's alive or dead. But the one thing we do know is that the Consul General of Israel to the southeastern U.S., Anat Sultan Dadon, made this statement when it happened. And I quote here, "We are saddened to learn of the self-immolation at the entrance to the office building. It is tragic to see the hate and incitement towards Israel expressed in such a horrific way. The sanctity of life is our highest value. Our prayers are with the security officer who was injured while trying to prevent this tragic act." I love the, is a cop okay? Like, I just, it's so callous that you're just like, the idea that these people say these words out loud, you can only imagine the complete inversion of every narrative that's going on in their mind, where they're looking at a guy or a woman putting pouring gasoline and setting herself on fire and being like, damn, you must really hate Jews. That's it. That's got to be what happened. So this story, of course, was quickly buried by Western news media. There was no doubt that this would have been the case for Aaron Bushnell if he hadn't recorded it and live streamed it on Twitch, and now they can't ignore it. And the fact that it was covered up, the fact that it was covered at all seems like kind of a miracle, but that doesn't mean the Hasbara machine and the cowardice and malice of the U.S. news media wasn't also in full effect. Here is a headline from Newsweek yesterday trying to spin Aaron as just some crazy guy. They said in Newsweek right here, Aaron Bushnell death report reveals police call about mental distress. Of course, if you actually read the article, it's not about like some prolonged history of like mental illness, police calls in the past where people are like, I'm worried about Aaron. No. You literally, in the first sentence of that article, it is literally just about the police call that they got that a guy was setting himself on fire. That's what that was. It wasn't like the way that is framed in Newsweek is clearly trying to spin him as just some crazy guy. And of course, we're going to see a lot more of that in the coming weeks with regards to Aaron Bushnell. It doesn't stop there. The Washington Post had this headline: Airman who set self on fire grew up on religious compound, had anarchist past. Just already ready to smear a guy who was, trying to bring attention to the complicity of the United States in this genocide. Someone who showed more bravery than I think 99.9% of anyone in the media class, or, honestly, anyone in law enforcement or military that I have seen. And of course, NPR came in with a real banger. NPR never fails to be like the best at being cold and detached. So they put out an article regarding Aaron Bushnell, and this was yesterday. And they said this: as of Monday morning, NPR was not able to independently verify the man's motives. What do you have to do? What do you have to do to independently? He's made a video of himself lighting himself on fire, screaming "Free Palestine," and you're sitting there like, well, what did he really mean though? Like, maybe like, was that code? Is this about the environment? Is this about like you have to be either dumb or malicious to look at that video and be like, I don't know, man. It could have been for any reason. Ugh, what do you fucking need? Like a body language expert? Body is currently on fire. But I suppose we have to be thankful that the news covered it at all, with CNN actually saying his last words on camera. They actually reported it because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many talking points you get. The media cannot resist a spectacle. So, if it bleeds, it leads. And that is why they actually talked about it. And I have a little bit from CNN.
What our ruling class has decided will be normal. He then goes on to pour some sort of accelerant, it looks like, on his head out of a water bottle he was carrying. And then he lights himself on fire, Boris. And as the flames engulf him, you can hear him yelling, free Palestine, again and again, until finally he collapses. And that is when officers, you can see them race in, one of them with a fire extinguisher in their hands, trying to put out the flames. We saw a similar incident in December when someone self-immolated, lit themselves on fire outside of the Israeli consulate in Atlanta. But this feels different. This is an active duty member of the military.
Late word tonight, President Biden saying late today that there is now hope for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas within days, by next Monday. It comes amid a horrific scene outside the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., a U.S. airman setting himself on fire.
So that's an interesting turn of events. That very night after Bushnell set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in D.C., Biden apparently made the statement that there is a possible ceasefire that is going to happen in a week, next Monday. And, I, at first, when I saw this, and it was reported everywhere, mostly in headlines, for a second, I almost felt hope. I was like, oh, that would be great. Is this happening? Like, did Aaron Bushnell's final act on Earth cause some sort of change? But then I saw the source of that quote, and folks, I literally can't prepare you if you haven't seen when Biden said this. I'll just play the video. He's at an ice cream shop.
Could you give us a sense of when you think that ceasefire will start?
Well, I hope by the beginning of the weekend. The end of the weekend. At least my national security advisor tells me that we're close. We're close. It's not done yet. And my hope is by next Monday we'll have a ceasefire.
Okay, thank you.
Just look at this old, poor, crotchety, senile, genocidal grampy. Like, he can't even eat some ice cream without being asked to stop a genocide. Just looking at that video, it just is so insane. I can't help but look at it and just look at his like cowardly, callous and cold face. This old man eating ice cream and juxtaposing it with Aaron Bushnell's final act on Earth. Just the photo of Aaron on fire and this fucking old ass man trying to eat his ice cream cone. It would be poetic if it wasn't so heavy-handed. You know what I mean? Like, it's just too on the nose. If there was any justice in this world, the flames of Aaron Bushnell would melt every single ice cream cone that this demented old bat ever tried to shove down his gaping maw. And hopefully there will be justice. But for now, I can just say, Aaron Bushnell, you were a real one. Wish I had known you. And free Palestine, man. Free Palestine. So that is today's main subject. And now I'm going to bring in our guest. Ladies and gentlemen, everyone else, we have a great guest today. This is a dear friend of mine, a fellow Los Angeles Jew, co-founder of the Jewish anti-apartheid group IfNotNow, and recently featured in this new documentary called Israelism, which I suggest everyone see. Ladies and gentlemen, everyone else, our guest today is Simone Zimmerman. Hey. Oh,
What's
you're
up?
muted. There you are.
I'm
What's
here.
up? How you doing, Simone?
Well, I'm really sad after hearing your
Yeah,
intro.
no, my intro is not. It
I mean,
wasn't.
I was sad anyways, but
Yeah, I tend to make it worse
yeah.
by reporting on it. I wish I didn't have to, but someone's got to do it. And I feel like if there's anyone who can relate to that, it's you, Simone.
It is.
You are
I see
someone.
you. I resonate very deeply.
Yeah, you're someone who, I've known first, like for a long time, first as someone, from IfNotNow, I would see your posts, and I was involved with it. If not now, for a bit, I did like a training session with them, and I've always very much respected that group. And then recently, I think we met up for the first time like 2 years ago, or I forget when, but you're just a badass. You're one of my favorite people, and you're someone who's been doing this work for a long time. And I want to ask you about that and how you got into it, how this is, how your life led you down the path of Jewish resistance to Israeli apartheid.
Yeah. And I'll just say, I feel like I saw you on Twitter. I saw those videos, your George Soros anti-Semitism
Oh
videos, and
yeah.
I was like, that guy knows what's up. I got to know this guy.
Yeah.
How
Hell
is
yeah.
there a left-wing Jew who has the exact same thoughts as me, but is way funnier than me, and I don't know him? So I would like to change that.
Hell yeah.
So
Yeah.
here we are.
Yeah, that's what brings us together. It's funny because I, uh, whenever I have guests on this podcast, and it's always very funny how many people are like, "Oh, damn, the people are people that I know independently of this show, and you seem to know them personally." And it's like, yeah, you have to understand the Jewish anti-Zionist like
Yes.
sphere is tiny, tiny, tiny. Like there's a lot of us, I think, doing the work, but in terms of like, you know, uh, I don't know. It's just like we all kind of know each other. you know, it's it's been a group of people.
I can't decide if I want to validate that because they want to make us look really small and marginal.
Right.
And I'm like, we're growing. There are so many of us.
Well, there's been more so than ever, which has been the great thing. But I think, for a long time, I think it's not crazy to say that our voices were the most marginalized. And I think maybe not the most marginalized, not more so than Palestinians or Arab voices in the United States. But in terms of this, the press that was received by anyone who was talking about Israel, it was for the most part, it had to be, you find all of your institutional Jewish community talking about it and and supporting Israel to the hilt. And they would pretend like we didn't exist. So we all kind of gravitated towards each other because we were talking about it publicly. And,
Totally.
and I feel like you and IfNotNow deserves a lot of credit for normalizing the idea of the anti-occupation, anti-apartheid, or anti-Zionist or non-Zionist Jewish person in the United States. So good job.
Yeah, we're trying. I mean, there are also hearing you say this, I'm like, there are people who out there who faced way bigger costs than I did.
Oh, sure,
Because
of course.
they were out, people who were in JBP, 10 years before I came.
100%.
I mean, they were getting crazy attacks. But
Yes.
yeah, I mean, the Jewish establishment works very hard to attack anybody who doesn't toe the line, who has any sort of, I mean, I was 25 working for the Bernie Sanders campaign for 5 days, and
That's right.
some of the most powerful figures in American Jewish institutional life made it a point to go out of their way and say, this person
Fire her.
shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Yeah, like as if they had any credibility to comment. Like that's what always cracked me up about it. Like, oh yeah, like Abe Foxman cared about the success of the Sanders campaign.
Right. Yeah,
like
exactly. Like as if Abe Foxman wasn't already calling Bernie Sanders a self-hating
yeah,
Jew.
they're like, from our deep interest in the well-being of the like nascent progressive movement, the growing youth-led, all things I, have a deep track record of investment in.
Right. Yeah. And no, if they
Yeah.
truly, believed in what they were saying, they would be like, they would leave the Bernie Sanders campaign alone completely. They would just be like, yeah, that's just some fringe no one's gonna, fall for that stuff. But I think they saw, this as a threat to the narrative about what Jews are supposed to be like in the United States. And yeah.
Indeed.
But you've faced a multitude of consequences. At one point I saw a video where you had been detained at the Egyptian border for hours, being questioned by Israeli soldiers about your political leanings and whatnot. I mean, it seems like you're someone who has put yourself at like grievous personal risk multiple times, and I want to hear how you got to that place, especially given your history. Like, how did you go from someone who was grown up supporting Israel to someone who had their eyes open?
Yeah. Well, it kind of all started for me when I was an undergrad at UC Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've been obviously like reflecting a lot on all of this because of the film, and the film talks about a lot of those experiences that I had. And I had kind of two seemingly, I thought these were complementary goals when I went to college. I was like, I chose to go to UC Berkeley because I wanted to meet people who were different than me.
Right.
I grew up in a very insular Jewish community in LA, Jewish day school, Jewish summer camp, Jewish youth group. And I was like, I should probably meet some other people that aren't just Jews from LA.
Yeah.
And, but I also thought that I was going to go do Israel advocacy. So I was like, I'm going to make these friends from different backgrounds, and then I'm going to teach them the truth about Israel, and I'm going to bring them over
Hell
to
yeah.
the good side.
Yeah.
Like
I
once
love
we
it.
talk, they'll have a good chat with me, and I will fix it.
Yeah.
And
The thing is, like they haven't yet heard these boilerplate Israeli Hasbara talking points from you before,
correct.
Yeah,
Yes. And
yeah.
I am particularly,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm particularly, I mean, I have to say, like, when I revisit some of both like my own memories, but also just footage and stories, there's something very painful about realizing like how ignorant I was, but also how arrogant I was about it, because that's kind of that's part of the indoctrination strategy, is to say, you know the truth, and you're going to go teach people the truth, even if you have no idea what you're talking about.
Right.
And like are totally ill-equipped to have these conversations. So, I remember the first time that I, had a conversation with a friend about Israel, and I was like, I busted out all the best hits, I was like, this is my moment. I'm here. I'm doing it. I'm saying we were here first, and they have, all these 20 something other countries to go to. And like, they just want to kill us all. And then she like had more questions for me because she, read the news and had questions about things she was reading. And I was like, oh shit, like I'm out, and I remember,
You're just reaching into the Hasbara bag of talking points. You go, kind of exhausted this. Did I mention that we were there first?
Yes.
I already did.
mean,
Okay.
that's like, I it's serious, but it's also completely absurd.
Yeah.
Like this is really part of what happens. And I remember, the really formative moment for me my freshman year was this debate that we had about divestment from two. There was a bill in the student government that was calling on the university to divest from two American companies that had profited off of the 2008-2009 assault on Gaza. And, first of all, it's just like worth, I feel like I have to say, like, wow, that's crazy that like people were like, we shouldn't, that, the idea that like we shouldn't support American weapons manufacturers, like already, like,
Yeah.
there should be some red flags there.
Yeah.
But alas, this was, framed to me just as an anti-Israel bill.
Right.
And I remember when I was part of this group that was called on to come to the very first hearing before the bill even made it to the floor of the student government. And there were these two graduate students who were in Students for Justice in Palestine, and they had these giant stacks of papers. It's like a very vivid memory for me.
Yeah.
And they just like, they had the case ready, this is what it was like to be living in Gaza during that assault.
Yeah.
And, this is the number of death. This is exactly what these weapons were used for. I believe one of the companies was also, I think it was, I'm going to mess this up, whatever. One of the companies like manufactured the Apache helicopters that dropped white phosphorus. And I believe the other one was involved in the surveillance that was used at checkpoints.
Wow.
HP and United Technologies, I think. Or General Electric and United Technologies. Anyways.
Yeah. I'll look it up.
Matter. Yeah. It doesn't, I mean, it matters, but also doesn't matter. It's okay.
Yeah.
But so there, and they were detailing like all these very vivid, descriptions and stories and like factual evidence compiled by human rights organizations about what the reality for Palestinians in the occupied territories was.
Yeah.
And I all I had with me was I'm not even joking. Like I had an Alan Dershowitz article.
Damn.
That's like I had an Alan Dershowitz article that was like, these are the reasons why you shouldn't divest from Israel. And
I just the idea of like, it's like showing up, I would say it's like showing up with a knife to a gunfight, but this is like showing up with like a banana that you're going to put in your hand and go pew 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 pew.
yeah, this is where we have to laugh about it a little bit, you
Yeah.
know? And I just like, I mean, also I like grew to know these characters. So like, I mean, one of these grad students was like an incredibly thoughtful
Yeah.
Israeli, by the way, Israeli anti-Zionist, like really had been deeply invested in his learning and activism for many, many, many years. And then it was like us, these kids from Hillel who literally had like, you know, a one pager about like, okay, our turn. So, you know, well, it's a double standard. Why are you singling out Israel and not any of these other countries? Well, you know, and like,
It's what's interesting to me about it too was that they showed a little bit of this in the documentary that you're featured in,
Yeah.
Israelism, and one of the things that I think was shown on that like one sheet was like tone directions, like they were like, be emotional.
so this is another thing
Yeah.
that was basically after the bill passed.
Mhm.
It passed like in the student government, and then there was this big lobbying campaign that included, you know, Jewish organizations in the Bay Area. It also included the Israeli Consul General himself involved in this lobby effort.
Yeah.
That, you know, was really, I think, miserable and intimidating to the like student government leaders who had all this intense pressure on them.
Sure.
And so before the next hearing, where we were having these debates about whether or not the student government would override the student body president's veto, they gave out these papers that gave us guidance about, you know, what to say, how to say it. We had an agreed set of talking points. And, you know, I think again, there's a little bit of a, I guess, lack of self-awareness or carelessness.
Sure.
But I mean, we left these papers behind. They were all over the floor. Some organizers picked them up and they were featured in a movie that was made. This was a movie made like over a decade ago about these divestment hearings specifically.
Oh, wow.
And I mean,
what's interesting, I love there's the normalization of this kind of like, Hasbara handbook stuff where, you are so it's just seen as so normal that you would have like, the Israeli consul general, showing up and giving you like, here's how to win an argument.
Yeah.
That you don't even question like, well, if I already feel passionately about this, like I should be able to win an argument on its merits and not so much need the need a like, why are you teaching me how to win this argument? Like the why am I responsible as a kid for your PR and for being the face of this fight? And I think it's just like you don't even question it. But go on.
Well, I was just going to say that I'm going to connect a dot to something that you said in the intro, that just like absolutely horrifying statement from the Israeli consulate about the woman who lit herself on fire outside, that, it's so sad that people just hate Israel so much.
Right.
Like there's a way in which, first of all, I actually think they're not trying to win the argument on the merits.
Yeah.
They're not, I'm not even convinced they're like they're trying to win the argument, but definitely not on its merits.
Sure.
They're not engaging directly in the argument. And
Right.
and the kind of, the message that I got growing up in this, very pro-Israel community was that like there's this very intense like paranoia and distrust of anybody who's outside of the community, and you get told that there are all these efforts, to delegitimize and to demonize Israel that are unfair and biased and this and that. And so before you even like engage critically. You don't have to think critically at all about the
Right.
substance of what anyone's saying, because you already know that it's wrong.
Right.
You already know that it's an attack on you. You know that it's going to make you unsafe. And so you just have to fight it. And so when that's like, and so that's like, I feel, I obviously cringe watching this older footage of myself, but I also feel like I have to have some compassion for
Sure.
like my own ignorance of like, I was doing what I was told, which was to go and defend my people.
Mm-hmm.
And then like actually what was the transformative experience for me was sitting in these student government hearings and listening to literally 2 hours of testimony from Palestinian students who talked about their own experiences
Yes.
with Israeli occupation and apartheid. I mean, these stories are like seared into my memory. I will never forget them in my life. Like, I remember what some of these people look like, what it was like, that your family members couldn't sleep for weeks while the bombs were falling overhead in Gaza, what it is like to be beaten at a checkpoint.
Yeah.
There was a student who said, my shoulder's never been the same since I was beaten at a checkpoint. And another student who talked about being detained in the airport when he goes to visit his family, like these. And I remember sitting there and like having a moment with myself where I was like, there's no way all of these people are lying.
Right.
Like, these are my peers. Like, we're on the same campus right now. Like, I don't know. These people seem pretty reasonable. Like, also, our side is not responding at all to anything they're talking about. There's got to be something else going on here.
Yeah.
And I started asking people questions like, why aren't we responding? And even like, I'll just add another layer onto this. So like you mentioned these talking points, we were told to say, I feel silenced by my student government. I feel unsafe. I feel uncomfortable. And people, before we could even make these talking points, they would get up and debunk them. And they would hold up a mirror to us. And there was one student who got up and said, Jewish students, you're talking about feeling silenced and marginalized on campus. Meanwhile, your communal institutions are actively in the process of passing red lines that forbid critical conversations inside their buildings. Right at that time, the San Francisco JCRC was writing its red lines policy that became like a precedent that many other Jewish organizations across the country then adopted, barring, critical voices, anti-Zionist Palestinians, from being heard, even like from allowing those events to happen inside the building. And there was even a video of the head of AIPAC's campus department who said, we're going to get pro-Israel students to take over the student government and reverse the vote. That's how AIPAC operates in our nation's capital, and that's how we need to operate on our nation's campuses. And that video went viral on campus. Like, I had been there at the conference, applauding, and then people were all of a sudden were like, excuse me? And so it was like all these moments of...
You guys are planning a coup on camera? Like, It is... It's wild, to see kind of like the difference in rhetoric. You said something about like, it can't be possible that all these people are lying. And I think that it resonates with me for sure, because I also look at like, when people say like, someone might respond with like, oh, well, all these like the Zionists out there are lying. What about, they say that Zionists are all liars. What I see, at least in my life, has been not Zionists, personally, that I know, people who are, they're other things first and Zionists second, I don't see them lying. I see them reverting back to a broad, overlook of the entire Middle East conflict, whenever an argument that is personalized is brought forth. So someone, gives a personal experience, like an anecdote about something that happened to them, being a Palestinian student or like living in Palestine, living in the West Bank or living in Gaza, and talks about their experience or the experience of their families. And then people, like myself, like yourself, when we were younger, like people that we've known, not trying to debunk that claim, but looking at it at this more broad picture of like, well, it's important to remember that historically X, Y, and Z happened and this and that. And then you bring up like, hey, Shimon Peres was going to give you a state and you said no. And, you start like trying to give a history lesson to not to so much justify what's happening to that person in their experience, but to change the subject to being about like something broader, something more, something bigger than just you at a checkpoint. And so it's not so much that they are constantly lying to you. It's that it's like we're lying to ourselves in order to like come to sleep at night, honestly, like to be comfortable with the realities that we have chosen to to live in, and those realities are not often based in reality. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I think you're completely right about that. But it's also like they're not com they're not consistent in that strategy. So like
Oh
at the
yeah.
same time as like, a personal anecdote of a Palestinian living under occupation is, has to have all this like bigger context, you know, one Jewish student who had a
Yes.
really uncomfortable experience on a college campus, or
Yes.
is like, freaked out by having to hear things that contradict their worldview,
Yes.
like is worthy of being a national headline.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
so
It's a crazy level of just like detachment from, I don't know. I would say it's a detachment from like empathy for others. But it's also, I think, like it speaks to uh, a level of like, I want to say like programming and sort of, I mean, almost cult like programming that goes on throughout, childhood, where these talking points are just so burned into you that to have them challenged, especially given that, that worldview is based on your own personal like victimhood, like this idea of like anyone being against Israel is just so insane to you because it's like saying you're against Jews. It's like you're saying you're against me. So like when someone challenges that, it's not so much that they're like, it sounds like it's like the first time you deal with anti-Semitism. That's what it feels like. That's what you've been programmed to believe is happening. The first time you hear someone say like Israel is bad or Israel is the bad guys, you're just like, I have never heard someone say something anti-Semitic before, and you feel like your own personal experience is almost equivalent to someone who's like, I was physically beaten at a checkpoint and my shoulder doesn't work anymore. You're like, yeah, well, one time I heard someone say something that my dad said wasn't real. So we all have our struggles. You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying. I mean, I'll say this actually made me think about that. I had an experience literally in one of these divestment hearings where at the end of it, a guy turned around to me and my friend and was like, "You guys still killed Jesus." And I was like, whoa, like
Yeah.
that was actually like the
Yeah.
first real anti-Semitic
Yeah.
thing that had ever been said to me in my life.
Yeah.
But I remember at that moment, I was like, and this is why all of this is wrong.
Right. Right.
Yes. Like not,
Yes.
whoa, there's a guy, like there's a dude in here who happens. And like, I mean, this is even happened to me recently at an Israelism screening where
Sure.
a guy came up to me afterwards and said something super anti-Semitic to me.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
I was like actually really glad that, the film talks about the prevalence of anti-Semitic ideas and movements in this country today. And that like, I'm very proud that the work I do includes, teaching people about, a progressive analysis of anti-Semitism, being sure that like, as we speak out for Palestinian freedom and liberation, that we understand the ways that like anti-Semitism, can get used to derail these movements, that
Mm-hmm.
understanding it and like fighting anti-Semitism is like a core part of our work for safety and liberation for all people.
Yeah.
And I remember, and like, I think some people will take all of that to be like, Palestinians just have to deal with it,
Right.
like that's not my problem, or will use any of these moments to kind of wholesale delegitimize an entire movement. And it's just it's so cynical and it's so gross.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of the reasons, like, I don't know, it's one of the reasons I started doing this podcast, was, well, number one, I've wanted to do this podcast for a while. Actually, you're, someone who can back up my claim about how long have I been talking about
I
doing this podcast.
You were talking about it and I was like, do it.
Yeah.
And now here we are.
Yeah. For a long time, this is something that I wanted to do, but I was like, I just want someone else to do it so that I can listen to it, because it's a subject that interests me a lot, but it's also a subject that takes a lot of time and a lot of research and also a lot of emotional energy that, I don't have. Like, I don't have it now. And I'm doing this podcast, but I'm doing it just because at this point it's the only thing that's keeping me sane. But yeah, one of the reasons that I started this podcast was because of the fact that I think, like, the fact is that this conflict, this subject, I think does have the potential to radicalize people in ways that I think can be anti-Semitic. Like, you see the way in which people interact with this. And I think if you're coming from a place of, just general ignorance about this, it is hard to blame someone for making rhetorical mistakes, I would call them, like saying Jews instead of Zionists, talking about the Jews, or like, repeating sort of tropes and whatnot. And I think that when that stuff kind of happens, especially if the person doesn't know any Jews, Israel and their Hasbara, one of the things they try to do is make being supportive of Israel and being Jewish synonymous, like basically the same thing. So in selling that and in marginalizing the voices of Jews who are critical of Israel, it can cause people to be like, these damn Jews are trying to, they're all together doing a genocide. And like, one of the reasons why I think I wanted to speak out about this was because that narrative is bullshit. Because Jews often and forever, I mean, for at least the existence of Israel and the existence of Zionism, have debated Israel, have talked shit about Israel. And a lot of the times it's been behind closed doors. A lot of the times it's been, something that you don't want to share with the rest of the world because you're afraid that the rest of the world, it's like a betrayal of other Jewish people. And you're afraid of, like, well, we don't want to give them a reason to hate Jews. So, we got to keep this to ourselves. But then it comes to a point at which, like, if you don't see any Jewish voices who are critical of Israel, you start seeing people who just, they get more and more radicalized to the idea that, like, the Jews are a, monolith who all support Israel and will, they're a fifth column who will, try to take over governments. It just, like, starts spinning out. And, like, for me, one of the, like, kind of best genre of message that I've received from people who listen to this podcast has been them saying, thank you for doing this, because I didn't know that there were Jews out there who believed the same things that I believed. And I started to feel myself getting, a little bit uncomfortable with some of the beliefs I was starting to have about Jewish people or about Israel and whatnot. And I think it's, goes hand in hand with the fight against, Zionism and racism is also a fight against anti-Semitism. They are inextricably linked because, we are against racism, period, whether it's Israeli racism against Palestinians or, European Christians racism against Jews. And yeah, I don't know. That's my thought on that.
Yeah, I mean, all great thoughts. Thank you.
Mhm.
I mean, this does make me think about, you know, it's completely understandable both that, Jews who are asking questions are feeling lonely, right? Because there is such a systematic attack on critical Jewish voices
Yeah.
inside Jewish communities, and a very aggressive attempt, even as our movements are growing so much and we have Jews speaking out all over the world, to continue to like try to reinforce this hegemonic narrative in view.
Hmm.
And I mean, I just like as you were speaking, and then like it's also understandable why people are so confused about anti-Semitism right now, because some of the groups that are, you know, the loudest and the most powerful and well-funded,
Hmm.
I'm thinking right now about a group like the Anti-Defamation League. They only make this problem a million times worse.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's, it you can't help but feel sometimes like maybe this is really good for their business model, you know?
Yeah. I
Keeping
mean,
Jews scared and paranoid like keeps the doors open. And I
100%. Yeah. I mean, you bring up the ADL, and I think that is something that I've wanted to cover more on the show. But like, what I find particularly, um, I don't know, disgusting, and also like slightly terrifying about it is that the ADL was not originally a Zionist like group. It did not exist for perpetuating the existence and security of Israel. Um,
There's actually like I will just say there's this new book that just came out called Our Palestine Question,
mm,
Our Palestine Question. Uh, the professor's name is Jeffrey Levin.
hmm.
He's a professor at Emory, and it actually talks about the history of dissenting voices within the American Jewish community since the founding of the state, and like there's
Interesting
just so much really rich. Um, yeah,
history of
history
it.
about
Yeah,
how these organizations, groups today like the ADL and the AJC that are so lockstep with the Israeli government,
yeah,
like that really had real questions about what is this going to be, and even like the reform movement, right? What is this going to mean about what is it going to mean, about our position on refugees? We have communities like
right,
American Jews were so close to the refugee experience. How do we relate to the Palestinian refugee crisis? I mean, I like
right,
conversations that you can't even imagine
yeah,
today, even
right,
having those conversations in the community, or like, what are people going to think about our loyalty as
right,
Americans? Like, maybe this is going to risk people thinking we have dual loyalty, which is this classic anti-Semitic idea. Like,
right,
these were actual conversations taking place in the community, uh, you know,
yeah,
75 years ago, even 50 years ago,
yeah,
that these organizations have worked very, very hard to like marginalize, and it's really meaningful to see that there are people who are trying to bring these stories back to the fore to remind us that it's not just this like new youth-led movement that we have in the streets today, but actually there's like a real lineage that we're connected to that has
100%.
always existed in our community.
Yeah, yeah, and it's it's not a history that is told at all because of the fact that it's as far as most people are concerned, at least in the Jewish community, when it comes to the subject of Israel, it's like we've rewritten the history of Zionism to not just be this early 20th century creation, but some sort of like an integral part to Judaism and to the history of Jews, as if, this state had existed, this entire time. We just hadn't yet come around to it. And so it makes the idea of talking about criticism of Israel and these like questions about like, what are people going to say about dual loyalty, or like the fifth column trope that we get. Like it just changes the history to be like, no, Jews have never talked about that. Jews have only ever supported Israel, even before there was the modern state of Israel. But like groups like the ADL are interesting to me because of the fact that they served what I would consider like a pretty like a pretty important purpose of like documenting anti-Semitism, and they were essentially a Jewish civil rights group for a long portion of their history, and they continue to this day to be there to say something when like Charlottesville happens, or when someone desecrates a graveyard with a swastika, a Jewish graveyard with a swastika or whatnot. But more and more in the last few decades, the ADL has turned to one of a handful of powerful Israel advocacy groups in America that we've come to the point at which they will run cover for anti-Semites, like Elon Musk, for example, because at the end of the day, Elon is going to support Israel, and he's going to, go there and say like, yeah, we got to kill all the Palestinians. It's like, okay, cool. As long as they're doing that, that's fine. And I'd say that puts us in a pretty dangerous position, because advocating for Jews where they live, like in America, seems to be the purpose of something like the ADL. At one point, it seems like maybe part of their original mission statement, as opposed to doing advocacy for a foreign government.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Elon Musk, like the whole dynamic with him is like such a scandal, and it's crazy that it really hasn't gotten like, I feel like there's this thing that happens for those of us like on the Jewish left who are trying to kind of talk about these things, where we're like, hello, like the most powerful man in the world, like has bought this platform, is using it to unleash like
straight white nationalists, like straight, just no filter white nationalists.
Yep. Yep. And it's like, then, it's like the idea that it only bears like, a passing mention that this person, I mean, and specifically, I'll say like he had this incident where I'm now gonna forget the actual tweet, but it was like pretty soon.
Yeah,
you have it.
I vaguely remember the tweet was
basically there was this
incredibly anti-Semitic. I remember that much.
Yeah, just like, I mean, textbook, like,
yes.
know, like really a case study in just, the most vile ideas about Jews that you could have. And he was like, this is the truth, right? Mm-hmm. And like ADL kind of put out like a slap on the wrist statement about that, I think. But then the next day, Elon was like, I'm going to ban River to the Sea on X.
Right.
And like, and then Jonathan Greenblatt, was the head of the ADL, was like, wow, thank you so much. And then like
quote
Elon
tweeted
Musk
him and be like, this guy, there's one thing he loves, it's us Jews.
Yeah. And then like, Prime Minister Netanyahu hosted a whole event with him. So it's like, you see the way that like the Israel Advocacy Network that ranges from like, pro-Israel groups in the US to like actual Israeli government are actively whitewashing and laundering the reputations of some of the most powerful anti-Semites in the world, as long as they help shill for Israeli apartheid and help advance these really, draconian. Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I have the tweet.
Pull it up.
I've pulled it up. And it said, some white nationalists who they all have blue check marks now. They're all paying $8 a month to Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, so that they can spew this kind of shit and get it seen. Okay, Jewish communities have been pushing the exact kind of dialectical hatred against whites that they claim to want people to stop using against them. I am deeply disinterested in giving the tiniest shit now about Western Jewish populations coming to the disturbing XYZ.
Looks like it was cut off.
Yeah, looks like it was cut off. And Elon Musk just wrote, you have said the actual truth. This kind of idea of like Jews being like deep down having a hand in sort of anti-white like I don't know, organizations and movements, like Jews are trying to get immigrants
Subvert
from
the societies that we live in.
Yes,
Nefarious, controlling behind the scenes schemers.
right, with like old school European like
Textbook.
anti-Semitism, boilerplate textbook, exactly. And Elon Musk saying, "You have said the truth," is just like, I mean, that's a horrifying thing for, I mean, anyone to agree with, let alone the richest man in the fucking world. Like the fact that he is buying into that is wild.
The point really is that you see, Jonathan Greenblatt at the ADL kind of continuously make the choice to whitewash people in power who actually like say anti-Semitic things or are, helping mainstream anti-Semitism in different ways.
Yeah.
With like a very polite slap on the wrist. Oh, I know him. I'm sure he didn't really mean it.
Yeah.
And then most of where they actually use their muscle is on like just trying to obliterate the reputations of, left-wing people of color, women of color, Palestinians, and, just like smearing and attacking the Palestine movement in just, the grossest ways. Once again, not really trying to win the arguments, like just attacks and smears. And, more importantly, we should say, because you brought up the kind of history of the ADL as this organization that is, actually has like ostensibly a role in like being an anti-extremism organization and being like a leading source on, violent extremism. Like we're seeing now reports coming out of their own researchers who are saying, first of all, the Jewish Currents reported about a month ago or so about actually a top executive who was brought to the ADL to combat online extremism, who left the organization because of the way it was handling Elon Musk and the whole Twitter thing. Like, I mean, people within the there's just like a ton of dissent from within the organization. And then people who are in the like extremism research departments saying to reporters that the way the head of this organization is conducting himself, and also like the way this organization has prioritized Israel advocacy over fighting extremism, is actually undermining the credibility like of their work and of their mission.
Yeah.
And I mean, they put out this report about a month ago as well that was like the latest count of anti-Semitic incidents, and at least 40% of the incidents in that report were so-called anti-Israel marches and events. And so it's like, how can you even trust the data? Like, we don't know that, like, you can't trust the data that they're putting out on anti-Semitism because so many things that they lump into that are actually have to do with Israel.
Right. And that is an actual material danger.
Correct.
The idea that
it makes people not believe that anti-Semitism is real. It makes people not believe that Jews like have risks to our safety.
Yes.
And the fact that like the most influential organization who is ostensibly like shaping the public conversation on this continues to discredit themselves actually endangers us.
Yes, 100%. It's like one of the reasons why I think it's like important to talk about this is because we are not living, in this, this idea that like being against Israel is automatically being against Jews, is automatically anti-Semitism. And this idea of just calling anyone who is criticizing Israel an anti-Semite, up and including the Jews and people like Aaron Bushnell, who set himself on fire and being like, well, this is, people who are doing this clearly, hate Jews that much. It waters down the meaning of anti-Semitism to a point where you find people who are just sick of, like, they're immune to the smear. So therefore, anyone who is called an anti-Semite, it's just like that people are scoffing and, throwing their hands up and going like, bullshit, I don't believe any of you, which is a danger. That is a material, actual, like, that puts Jews in danger in the world. And like having the ADL play along with that and like be a part of that is an insane thing. It blows my mind. And I think it blows a lot of people's minds in general, the way that like, when people say something like Zionism and the state of Israel are anti-Semitic. Like people just go like, oh, that's what? How can that be?
Also, like, let's say that the inverse of what you said is also true, which is that the fact that these organizations continue to say any attack on Israel is an attack on Jews, and if you don't like Israel, you don't like Jews, then also reinforces this idea that all Jews are responsible for what is happening in Israel right now. And so not only does it make people not believe that anti-Semitism is a real thing, but then it makes people think that Jews are a legitimate target for their rage at the Jewish state.
Right. Because I mean,
which doubly endangers us.
Exactly. And it is, I'm not going to pretend to be altruistic here. Like, there's a percentage of me that's like, I don't like anti-Semitism, and that's a big reason why I'm talking about it. It's like it is also about self-preservation. I think it's one of the beautiful traditions of Jews throughout the world has been advocating against racism in societies and advocating for minority groups living in other states to have the same rights and protections as anyone else. And it is, that includes Jews, and it includes all sorts of groups. But the way in which, Jews are attacked for being anti-Israel is always, I think, the most interesting thing to me and to I think a lot of our listeners is just like seeing the way in which a Jew will be torn down by these institutions and Zionist institutions and Zionist advocacy groups and Israel advocacy groups, even if they're not Jewish. And that leads me to this recent thing that happened with the film No Other Land, won Best Documentary at in
the Berlinale.
The Berlinale.
I don't think we're pronouncing it right, but
no, you say it with an Italian accent.
Yeah,
Berlinale.
I think it's in Germany.
Yeah, well, I'm still going to do it with the Italian accent because it's more fun. And one of the film's, I think, directors. Now, this was made by a collective of both Jewish Israelis and Palestinians who made this, and it's a documentary about Israeli apartheid. So Yuval Abraham, when they won the award, he went on stage and he gave a little speech that has since, number one, went viral, and number two, caused him a bit of a headache. So I'm going to play a little bit of that for y'all.
I want to say we are standing in front of you now. Me and Bassel are the same age. I am Israeli, Bassel is Palestinian. And in 2 days, we will go back to a land where we are not equal. I am living under a civilian law, and Bassel is under military law. We live 30 minutes from one another, but I have voting rights. Bassel is not having voting rights. I'm free to move where I want in this land. Bassel is, like millions of Palestinians, locked in the occupied West Bank. This situation of apartheid between us, this inequality, it has to end. I want to say we are standing in front.
He gave that speech after winning this award, and it didn't go great for him because now he is receiving death threats, and he was planning on returning back to Israel after this, but he has not yet because of the amount of pushback that he's gotten from both Israelis, from Jews in Israel, as well as Germans who are going after him, which is, I think, one of the more mind-blowing things is just like when a German official feels comfortable enough to criticize Jews as being anti-Semitic. And you sent me this article that was in the Guardian that I'm going to read some of. So
Yeah,
go ahead.
I mean, I was just gonna say, like, there's so many levels of, yes, these people should be like totally humiliated and roasted for the just like desecration
Yeah.
and like just like complete upside down land that is the way that the state of Germany has like completely offloaded its guilt about the Holocaust into this intensely pro-Israel, intensely anti-Palestinian. And then, as I think you're about to read Yuval's statement, after he was called anti-Semitic
Mhm.
by multiple politicians in Germany.
Yeah.
And his statement and response is just so powerful. So you should just read it.
Yeah. So Israeli director receives death threats after officials call Berlin Film Festival anti-Semitic. An Israeli filmmaker who won one of the top prizes at the Berlin Film Festival has said German officials' description of the award ceremony as anti-Semitic has led to death threats and the physical intimidation of family members, causing him to hold off plans to return to Israel. Yuval Abraham, 29, was on Saturday awarded the Berlinale's Best Documentary Film Award for No Other Land, which charts the eradication of Palestinian villages in Masafer Yatta. I pronounce it.
Masafer Yatta.
Yeah, Masafer Yatta. I'd said it close enough.
Close enough,
in the West Bank. Abraham's acceptance speech, which he decried a situation of apartheid and called for a ceasefire in Gaza, was one of several moments during the closing ceremony in which the filmmakers expressed solidarity with Palestine. It sparked outcry in German media the following day, with several politicians alleging the speeches had been anti-Semitic. To stand on German soil as the son of Holocaust survivors and call for a ceasefire, and then to be labeled as anti-Semitic is not only outrageous, it is also literally putting Jewish lives in danger, Abraham told The Guardian. I don't know what Germany is trying to do with us, he added. If this is Germany's way of dealing with its guilt over the Holocaust, they are emptying it of all meaning.
Mic drop.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that is like so important. That last bit is so important because you see the way in which Germany is, invokes the Holocaust for its Israel advocacy. And I can't think of anything more anti-Semitic than watering down the Holocaust. You know what I mean? Like, I can't think of anything more anti-Semitic than changing than being a German person, a German official, and trying to tell the son of a Holocaust survivor, what you're doing is very Holocausty. As a German, I think I know a thing or two about the Holocaust. And that speech you said, wow, big yikes, dog. Like, these guys are when you do this kind of like revisionism, and you also like end up trying to put a Jew's life in danger, in order to show that you are the most pro-Israel. Like, I look at that and I just go like, we are living in like upside down land, man. Like, this is fucking insane. It's just crazy.
I'm gonna just add like one other detail to this story, which is at the bottom of the same article that you were just reading from, but it's just so just absurd. Like, first of all, like, Yuval was attacked for also speaking about the reality that Basel, his partner in this film, they're both journalists who write for 972 magazine.
Yeah.
Like, he's also talking about first of all, the horrifying reality that Basel lives under, that's the subject of the film, right? And like that he's also worried about Basel's safety for the potential backlash from this. And in response to all this backlash, which has now included calls for the resignation of the Minister of State for Culture. Her name is Claudia Roth, who I guess there was footage of her clapping at the event.
Yeah.
So now there have been calls, and I just want to like draw the connection. It's like we see this happening in the US also, which is like these calls to defund culture, higher education, all the state culture in Germany is state funded.
Right.
So they're always trying to get this culture minister fired. And she then puts out a statement clarifying that her applause was directed at the Jewish Israeli journalist and filmmaker.
I clapped for the Jew.
And not at the Palestinian, which is like, it's so racist. Like, you said that out loud.
That's your damage control, is being like, listen, I know it looks bad when I clapped, during him talking about apartheid in Israel and, a ceasefire and all of that stuff. But I want to be clear. I wasn't listening to the Jew talking. I don't know the Jewish words. All I saw was a Jew, and I said, yes, I love Jews. And when the Palestinian was talking, I said, not from me, Jew hater. Not from me. Like, this is, what kind of society is this?
It's really cartoonish. I'm not going to even try to editorialize because you did great.
Just listen, I can't end a Bad Hasbara podcast without eventually doing an accent. And
yes,
I'm glad
that does seem to be
it's a theme with me.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm not good at them, but I enjoy them.
We got a lot in here on this episode.
Yeah, we got a few. I got Italian in somehow. But yeah, like that it's just so it is so detached from reality. It's so detached from like what I think any normal person would look at. Like, what normal person is gonna see that statement and go, oh, okay, I was worried that you were doing something racist, but then I found out you specifically didn't clap for the Palestinian, and now I feel better. Like,
yeah, it's like maybe you didn't learn a lot of lessons that you should have learned from.
Yeah. It seems like your history has taught you nothing. And I feel like, when I talk to, especially like the Germans who listen to this podcast, you see the amount of kind of like repression in terms of like, expressing any feelings whatsoever of discomfort with the idea that Israel is just kind of like allowed to do whatever it wants because of, and Germans aren't allowed to say anything because of their history and whatnot. And like, I feel bad, I feel bad because, at the same time, I'm like, yeah, I think you should be able to, with absolute moral clarity, be a German citizen and be like, genocide is bad. At the same time, I can see people being like, no, you guys don't say nothing. Just, like I would rather, it's like, I'd rather they were just
sitting this one out.
Like that's the best thing that they could do. It's literally the best thing they could do. But instead, they've pinned a button on their lapel that says the most Israel advocacy.
They joined Israel at the ICJ.
Yes, they did. And, if there's one thing that Germany is known for, it's being
defending genocide.
Defending genocide at a war crimes trial. So listen, they have experience. I get it. You call on your people who know their shit. But yeah, so listen, that's the world that we live in. It's a sad one and it's got a lot of tragedy, but you know what it also has? It has awesome people like Simone Zimmerman who are out here, speaking truth to power. And I don't mean that facetiously. You do great work. And I'm so glad that I got to have you on this podcast, after years.
It's an honor. I've been waiting for my moment.
Yes. Your moment has come to be on a podcast that is not nearly as successful as the ones you've done before, the other appearances, which, by the way, every appearance that you've made on those other things has been great. You're fantastic. Just in case you don't know, you are great, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. Can't wait to come back here.
Hell yeah. Come back anytime. Where can people find you and find your work?
I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram.
Hell yeah.
My handle is the same at both places. It's Simone R. Zim.
Simone R. Zim. Check her out. Twitter, Instagram, and follow her immediately.
And you can watch Israelism. It's available to rent anywhere in the world right now. And we're also having lots of screenings all around the world.
Wonderful.
So
it is a great documentary, and I think it couldn't have come at a more opportune time, to use that crass word, but like the fact that it came out now, while this is all going on, it came out actually a year ago.
Oh, did it? It premiered a whole year ago now. But yes,
but it wasn't available for rent until very recently.
No, it was doing the festival circuit at the beginning, and it was doing campus screenings. But yeah, I mean, I hope that it's a tool for people to have hard conversations about bad Hasbara in their communities.
Yes. I mean, it really is like, for me, it was a great thing to watch for, I don't know, just like putting in context the level of Hasbara that we are inundated with when we are younger, and the institutions that are trying to keep us in this bubble, and seeing people break out of it in a multitude of ways, and some ways more tragic than the others, like, the one subject who joined the IDF and saw what that was actually like. Like seeing the way in which people come to like realize that everything they've been told is lies is, I think it's important, because it also, I think, humanizes, I think a lot of us who are, having to deal with people thinking we're a monolith, and that we are, how could you, just blindly support Israel? And I think it puts into context, like, dog, we were born supporting Israel. Like, it is not an easy thing to break out. I was
born this way.
Yeah, I was born this way. Exactly. But yeah, it is a great film, and you're fantastic in it, and you're a fantastic guest. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for this fantastic podcast to make us all feel a little bit more sane.
I hope so. At the very least, I hope people just enjoy me doing shitty accents. Patreon.com/badhasbara. Please join. And you'll see there's a new tier for $10. I will shout you out on the podcast. Those are coming. I'll collect those soon. But please, join. It's the way I can support myself and continue doing this. But if not, also I just enjoy you guys listening. badhasbara@gmail.com for all of your questions, comments, and concerns. All right, everyone. Thanks again so much for listening. And until next time, from the river to